we're back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, to Let's Play Metal Gear Solid 2, Sons of Liberty. For another episode 0, before we jump into the main game, we're going to take a look at some of the special. Similarly to Metal Gear Solid, there is a article on the previous story. And we're going to go through it. In this game, there's only one, which is just this right here. So let's take a look at the New York Mirror. In the Darkness of Shadow Moses, The Unofficial Truth. Author, Nastasia Romanenko. Reviewed by George Franklin. Some topics in the recent American past have the immediacy and the power that still engage our collective imagination. Names like the Grassy Knoll or Roswell roll off our tongue with deliberateness reserved by most other nations for holy lands. With this new nonfiction account from Nastasia Romanenko, Shadow Moses, the scene of a nuclear siege 2 years ago, is set to join their ranks. Official history states that the takeover of a nuclear weapons disposal facility on a lonely outpost in the Fox Islands, Alaska, was the work of a radical right-wing group. Their demands for the release of a group members incarcerated in federal penitentiaries were never met, and the incident was speedily resolved by the successful deployment of a commando unit. BS, the author asserts. Romanenko says that she served as an advisor to the Nuclear Emergency Search Team, and deconstructs what she claims to be a cover-up story by the government with precision. According to the author, Shadow Moses Island was nothing less than the U.S. Army's testing grounds for a top-secret weapon known as Metal Gear Rex, an all-terrain bipedal tank with advanced nuclear capabilities. As for the facility's takeover, Romanenko alleges that it was the U.S. military's own shadowy wetworks force known as Foxhound that staged an armed insurrection in a bid for Rex's possession. The government responds to this crisis by sending in a lone operative, a former Foxhound member known only by the codename Solid Snake, into Shadow Moses. His infiltration is aided by a remote mission control team consisting of an unidentified Colonel Campbell, a Foxhound medical chief Naomi, a radar and electronics expert Mei Ling, supposedly a teenager, and the author herself. Once on the island, Snake joins forces with Metal Gear's developer-turned-prisoner, Otacon, to eradicate the weapon of mass destruction. Among the other remarkable characters that make an appearance in Romanenko's expose is another Foxhound commando, a revolver virtuoso called Shalashaska, aka Revolver Ocelot. One of the most controversial allegations in the book deals with this figure's connection to a disavowed Russian militia led by a Colonel Golukovich. Romanenko paints a bleak picture of a 1,000-strong, highly disciplined army with nuclear weaponry operating covertly within the American border. Even more irresistible to conspiracy scholars and students of recent history is her thinly veiled suggestion that the whole affair was planned from the beginning by certain forces inside the U.S. government. The U.S. Army and the usual suspect of federal agencies have issued a statement denouncing the book as a complete fabrication. However, with a number of detailed eyewitness accounts that back up the author's assertions cropping up daily on the web, the denials serve more to enhance the book's growing reputation. Shadow Moses is an engrossing read for casual and serious readers alike, and promises to involve readers in a meaty debate over the truth of the matter for many years to come. Excerpted from the literary review column All Booked Up, The New York Mirror. Oh, okay, so we're going to unlock others. The shocking conspiracy behind Shadow Moses. By Gary McGolden. The island of Shadow Moses lies due north of Alaska's Fox Islands, deep in the Arctic Circle. Above one of its rocky cliffs stands a cabin normally used for meteorological surveys, and it was here that I found myself, seated on a chair with my hands bound behind my back and a burlap sack covering my entire head. A blizzard rages outside, and the cabin was a dark, silent patch somewhere inside the storm. I could sense at least 4 men around me. They had been interrogating me for what felt like hours now. The burlap sack is pungent with the traces of coffee beans. In the biting cold of the cabin, images of Brazil come to me unbidden. Alleys coiled through with vivid, unintended profusion of flowers, children with skin like frothy chocolate, sunshine capable of burning out the cornea, erupting between palm fronds. I can feel my senses starting to fail. The man in front of me asks for the second or the 100th time. I'm going to ask you again. What's in the optical disc? Told you, I don't know. I just found it, okay? You're lying, you bastard. A fist explodes into the pit of my stomach, bringing up a peanut butter sandwich of many hours ago, along with the rusty taste of blood. The relentless beating and numerous knife cuts of the past hour have my whole body screaming with pain, but I refuse to tell them what they wanted. I had too much invested at this point, too many days of dangerous investigation into the story of a lifetime. There was no way I was going to give it all up at this point. That's enough. A voice spoke up from somewhere in the back of the cabin. We have the disc back. Just get rid of him so we can get out of this place. Even in my current sorry state, I was still a journalist. He had said, we have the disc back. That meant that my hosts were the original owners of the optical disc. The last piece of the puzzle was in its place. I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that everything recorded on the disc was true, and that the conspiracy I had suspected did in fact exist. At that moment, I heard a window shatter. The raging storm outside seemed to gain entry to the cabin in an instant, and I had heard thin screams from the captors that encircled my chair. The next second, they had already fallen heavily onto the floor. The brief confusion ended before I regained enough presence of mind to even panic. Whoever was now here, whatever had happened, my tormentors were obviously out of commission. But now I could hear measured footsteps approaching across the floor. If this person had just saved my life, who was it? Or was I about to share the other's fate? The footsteps came to a halt in front of me, but strangely enough, I did not feel any sort of a presence nearby. The burlap was slowly lifted from around my head, pulled off by an unseen hand. The stinging night air cooled my face, and my eyes gradually regained focus in the darkened room. And I could finally see who it was that stood before me. Just out of the sight of most of its citizens, a massive conspiracy determines the working of this nation. Weapons of mass destruction secretly developed by the military. Super soldiers re-engineered into war machines through genetic manipulation. A killer virus that only targets specific individuals with deadly accuracy. Tanks that walk rather than roll and carry a nuclear payload. A covert organization, the third and the most powerful political party, my encounter with which landed me in this chair in the Alaskan winter. All of these are a part of the truth I found sealed within the optical disc, and I intend to share what I have learned in the pages to follow. That includes everything I now know about our government and the secret arena where an even greater power pulls the strings. This is the truth many have glimpsed but never dared to talk about. Everything detailed in this book actually happened, and after I lived it, my world was no longer the same safe place that I knew. Neither, I promise, will be yours if you have the courage to keep going. It all began a month ago. The postman rings. A month before my dramatic escape from death on Shadow Moses, I was having late breakfast in my apartment in New York. Ever since an alien abduction episode in my childhood, I had been plagued by a persistent ringing in my ears. A large patch of mud was my undoing. I slipped, fell, and was knocked unconscious. When I came to, it was already dawn. Later, I was trying to see the bump on the back of my head in the mirror when I saw it instead. A small hole about the size of a pinprick had been made behind my ear. You learn a little something when you watch as much TV as I did. There was no doubt that I had been abducted by a passing UFO and had spent the hours while unconscious with alien beings. Unfortunately, no one in the area recalled seeing a UFO, and not a single person had the sense to listen to my story. I realize now that this was the day I decided to uncover truth for a living and become a journalist. But back to the present day. It turned out that the ringing wasn't in my ear, but from the doorbell. The thing shrieked somewhere south of a baritone bat sonar, barely within the range of a human hearing. Blame the mangling it took from a particularly displeased visitor. Outside the door was the mailman, and in the mailman's hand was a thick manila envelope. On the envelope was a label, addressed to me. A letter bomb. I pressed my ear against the envelope and concentrated hard, but not a tick from the thing. Of course, no one uses analog watches and bombs these days. That's why they call it the digital age. In fact, why would there even be a watch in a letter bomb? The point is that the unlucky recipient opens it and the bomb goes off, which means that it's actually the completely silent envelopes that are dangerous. I knew that opening that flap would send my eggs to the big omelet in the sky, but you don't get to be an investigative journalist for thinking inside the box. I tore through the bottom of the envelope instead. Rip. No! The contents of the suspicious envelope dropped to the floor with lightning speed. In this world, you can never be too careful. Let this be a warning to you, readers. When circumstances compel you to open an envelope from the bottom, turn it upside down first. As a rule, I discovered objects fall down, and this is what happened to the contents of my lethal envelope. Straight down into a half-eaten depth of a delivery pizza forgotten on the floor. I don't recall when exactly this food item arrived on these premises, but the thing was definitely a museum piece by now. Fortunately, it wasn't a bomb, but an optical storage disc, now liberally smeared with peanut butter. The disc was the kind that comes in a clear plastic casing, though through which the rainbow sheen of the circular unit shone. I gazed into it a while, thinking of the UFO from that fateful day. Anyway, I fished the optical disc out, noting the lack of a label. A quick wash at the sink got rid of the crud it had accumulated. The disc was drying by the window as I hunted through the now harmless envelope for clues. A single sheet of Xerox paper was stuck to the inside, and it read, "From the desk of Max Smithson, Editor-in-Chief, Mega Surprise Magazine. I'm mailing you this optical disc that was sent to the edit department. It's right up your alley. See if you can turn up something more. We'll do a book if you get enough stuff together. This is your chance for a comeback, so don't screw it up." Max is an old friend and used to manage most of my book deals way back when. We hadn't seen each other much since I gave up writing. Not that he has the right to tell me about comebacks and screwing up, but I find myself growing excited by the prospect of writing another book. But there was a problem, and it was a big one. How the hell was I going to get the disc's content? The shocking truth within. My next-door neighbor is a starving college student, and I hit him up for the use of his computer now and then. I banged on his door and screamed repeatedly until he shuffled up to the door half asleep. Once inside, I made a beeline for the piece of junk and stuck the disk into the drive. The icon appeared on the display with a gentle whir, and the file name read, "In the Darkness of Shadow Moses." But an urgent click on the icon only brought up an error message. What nefarious scheme was this? What secret encryption was preventing me from accessing the data? I clicked again, and again with the same result, and started to gnaw on the keyboard in frustration. The starving student came running over, wailing about his equipment. He typed in some moonman language, avoiding patches of my spit, and a frighteningly cheerful application startup screen appeared on the display. Then, lo and behold, I finally laid my eyes on the dense mass of text, the contents of the disk. At the very top, it read, "In the Darkness of Shadow Moses" by Nastasha Romanenko. The starving student was being scholarly and trying to read the text over my shoulder. I knocked him out with a punch to the solar plexus and devoured the file's content. It was like a blow to the head with a frozen tuna. My brain was already reeling from the shock. The file was full of wild stuff, top secret conspiracies, incredible genetic experimentation, cold-blooded military deployment of classified weapons. This was the most incredible stuff I had ever come across. The unofficial facts, according to the disc. Most readers should be aware of the series of strange military actions involving an island farther north of Alaska's Fox Islands some 2 years ago. The island was called Shadow Moses and received a series of well-documented but never explained visits of obvious significance. USS Discovery, an Ohio-class ballistic missile submarine, was ordered away from its designated training area and was confirmed offshore of Shadow Moses Island. It joined an E-3C AWACS that had already and suddenly been deployed to the area with none other than Jim Houseman, the National Security Advisor, aboard. 16 hours later, 6 F-117 Nighthawks with a full payload took off from the Galena AFB for Alaska. Various theorists were placed into circulation by the media at the time. Some journalists insisted it had been a foiled invasion attempt by a foreign state. Others suspected a coup d'etat by a part of the U.S. military. I myself wrote an opinion piece for a magazine explaining that Shadow Moses was the Ellis Island for the Greys. This diminutive gray race is, after all, the most famous of our alien neighbors, notorious for having secret bases all over planet Earth. But, according to this file, we had all been off our marks. What had instead unfolded on Shadow Moses was the most major terrorist incident in history, an apocalyptic scenario born out of a government-developed Superman project, and a doomsday weapon of the same origin. On that fateful day, the nuclear weapons disposal plant on Shadow Moses had suddenly been seized by an irregular operations squad called Foxhound, aided by a group of next-generation super soldiers, and what they threatened was no less than a nuclear strike against the mainland of the United States. So how is it that we're all still alive? Apparently we have a man known only as Solid Snake, and his solitary infiltration of the disposal facility to thank for it. Believe it or not, this is only the tip of the iceberg as far as the Shadow Moses incident is concerned. The disc contains many more horrifying facts, such as a major government conspiracy, a classified weapon described as a walking nuclear-capable tank, and advanced genetic manipulation projects. Many of these hidden dealings were discovered by Solid Snake as he carried out his mission, and it is now my job to relate these facts to you, the readers. But is it still a little too premature to do so? The content of the disc may, after all, be nothing more than fiction, or even a delusion. After all, who exactly is this Nastasha Romanenko? In search of Natasha Romanenko. A quick search of the web turned up a few illuminating facts about this elusive writer. Nastasha Romanenko was at one point with the DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency. At the time of the Shadow Moses incident, she appears to have been a freelance military analyst, having already resigned from the agency. Nuclear and weapons technology would certainly be right up her alley, and in the disc she states that she took part in Solid Snake's mission support. Her exact role was as a member of NEST, Nuclear Emergency Search Team, providing field expertise via the radio. Her intimate involvement in the mission gives her a complete and clear grasp of the facts surrounding the case despite the government's successful cover-up. A look at Romanenko's curriculum vitae and body of papers makes her anti-nuclear stance more than obvious. That, along with all the other facts about this person, suggests that unless she suffered a sudden chemical imbalance or is plotting a second career as a Hollywood screenwriter, Nastasha Romanenko does not indulge in expounding conspiracy theories for its own sake. All very interesting, so where is Nastasha Romanenko now? I decided to give Global Elements Inc., the book's publisher, a call. Below is a complete transcript of the conversation. Me. Hello. Listen, you leftover carnival prize. What do you know about a woman named Nastasha Romanenko? Whoever it was. Hey, your village called. They want their idiot back. Now watch your language, freak. Click. Clearly, they're hiding something. Why else the abrupt response and the hasty hang-up? I was on the trail of something important. Something dangerous. If the content of the disc was true, this Nastasha Romanenko was definitely the woman who knew too much. Her life would be in danger, and she must either have gone to ground or was already dead. That brief telephone conversation spoke volumes. There was a contract out on her life. If this was the price of speaking the truth as described in that disc, the picture was complete. But was everything she wrote really true? I went back to my apartment and packed a bag. I was headed for Shadow Moses, the coldest place. I took a plane out to the northernmost domestic airport and went to see my cousin, John D. John D is a hardcore Alaskan and a big-eye tuna fisherman. When I asked him to drop me off at Shadow Moses Island during one of his trips out to sea, he turned pale and a nervous tick started up at the corner of his eye. Shadow Moses. Are you nuts? All the other guys say the place is crawling with the military. If you get even close to the shore, they shine these huge searchlights in your face, and some of my buddies even got interrogated once. I felt the sudden chill of fear along with a certainty that I was on the right track. You're a wuss. You know that? Try being abducted by a UFO. That'll teach you what's really scary. I got a family, you know? I'm not about to go messing around with the man. Okay, you get me as close as you can then. I'll swim the rest of the way. Swim. You're going to turn into a frozen tuna treat. Don't worry about that. I have an idea. We sailed out for Shadow Moses Island that day. The trip to Shadow Moses. It was colder than the dairy section. It was colder than the dairy section, and the boat pitched like a subway derailment on caffeine. I shook constantly from the cold, retched peanut butter into the sea, then down some more to keep warm. A few days passed in this pleasant fashion until John D., drawing lines on his charts, turned to me. I'm sorry, man, but this is as far as I can go. If you really want to do this thing, you're going to have to find your own way. There were at least 20 miles to Shadow Moses according to the chart, but John D. was already a blubbering wreck, and I didn't have the heart to strong-arm him. I steeled my nerves. It's okay. Help me get ready. The plan was brilliant. I'd gutted a supersized tuna and stuffed some inflated balloons inside, along with a small oil lamp to keep the interior toasty. I would cover the length of my body with the fish and dog paddle my way to the island. Any oxygen shortage could quickly be remedied thanks to the balloon, and my landing would appear to be nothing more than a large dead fish swept ashore. All I had to do was slip out of the tuna undetected and investigate the hell out of the place. Absolutely brilliant. A small break from the reading. I have never read this, and I'm trying so hard not to laugh. Okay. I bore the fishy stink of the tuna skin with proper journalistic aplomb and walked to the edge of the ship's deck. The Arctic wind was numbing even through the wetsuit, but I bade John D. a hearty farewell and jumped into the sea. But right then, disaster struck. Actually, it was the tuna spine. Its bony mass conked me hard on the back of my head from the force of the landing. I tried to right myself, but I was jammed tight against the balloons. The tuna started to sink rapidly. I kicked my legs wildly as about a gallon of seawater rushed into my lungs. To add insult to injury, the lamp fell over, shedding its cover. I could feel the heat of the exposed flame dangerously close to my face and smell the singed hair. This is why I hate traveling. But after what felt like hours, I found myself ashore on Shadow Moses Island. Now, let's take a moment here to review what happened on the island on that fateful day. Romanenko's disc provides a complete answer. Shadow Moses was no ordinary weapons disposal facility, but served as a secret military training ground, among other things. On that day, the Wet Works Commando Unit, known as Foxhound, and the Next Generation Special Forces Group were conducting joint exercises. Foxhound is an irregular squad of elite soldiers equipped and armed to the teeth with the latest technology. They were long-time and strictly behind-the-scenes players throughout recent history, engaging in sabotage, selective assassinations, and other covert military operations. Wherever the United States could not officially intervene, whether it was a civil war, regional unrest, or other types of low-intensity conflict, Foxhound was there. It's unlikely, however, that an average citizen has ever heard of them before. These commandos remain a top-secret government project. And then, there's the Next Generation Special Forces Unit. This is a cutting-edge anti-terrorist force newly organized to cope with terrorist incidents specifically involving weapons of mass destruction typified in nuclear, biological, and chemical warfare. They draw heavily from former mercenary ranks and are on a diet of rigorous VR training, guided by the Force 21 concept. The result is combat capability, which is rumored to surpass even those of the Delta Force and DevGru, formerly known as SEAL Team 6. Most frighteningly of all, these soldiers have supposedly been manipulated at the genetic level to increase their combat performance. They were the purebreds among the dogs of war, and they turned on their masters with a surprising demand. Having seized the civilians that were on hand, they demanded that the government turn over to them the body of Foxhound's founder and combat genius, the so-called Big Boss. The government had 24 hours to comply, or a nuclear strike would be initiated. But what would motivate them to make such a demand, and how did they intend to make good their threat of a nuclear launch? With these questions still unanswered, the government decided on a seemingly reckless course of action. For this daunting task of stopping a nuclear strike and freeing the hostages from the clutches of these ultimate soldiers, they sent in a single man. His name was Solid Snake, no other than a former member of the now renegade Foxhound, and a legend among mercenaries for single-handedly bringing down the fortress cities of Outer Heaven and Zanzibar land. Your reaction is probably one of incredulity. Just one guy? You may wonder. They decided to gamble the future of the entire world on a single mercenary. I wholeheartedly agree with the sentiment, but there is more to this mission than meets the eye, as I was to later discover. Solid Snake's remote support team. Snake was delivered to the island by USS Discovery, an Ohio-class ballistic missile submarine. He may have been the lone field operative, but there was a distinguished mission control team in contact with him by radio. The overall control of the mission rested with Colonel Roy Campbell aboard the USS Discovery. As a former commander of Foxhound and Snake's CO during the 1999 Zanzibar land standoff, he was forcibly called out of retirement to deal with the latest crisis. Also aboard the Discovery was Dr. Naomi Hunter, a genetic engineering expert with the commercial biotech firm ATGC Inc. She was in charge of Foxhound's gene manipulation program. Mei Ling, the architect of the mission's state-of-the-art radar and communication systems, was the third team member, apparently something of an engineering wonderkind. She developed this next-generation communication technology while still a student at MIT. At the time of the mission, she may have still been in her teens. McDonnell Miller, a former Foxhound survival instructor, was the only land-bound member of the mission control team. Unlike the other four, Miller was working out of his home in Alaska at his own request. Lastly, Natasha Romanenko, the author of In the Darkness of Shadow Moses, rounded out the team as an expert on nuclear and other weapons of mass destruction. What terrorist acts were committed here? The hostages and what they tell us. The first task faced by Solid Snake upon his infiltration of Shadow Moses Island was the rescue of the hostages. Two of the captives in particular were considered top priority, but neither survived the mission. Though Snake successfully freed both men, they died suddenly in an identical manner. At the time, the mission control team tentatively attributed the deaths to heart attacks, a diagnosis that was to prove starkly incorrect. The first hostage was Donald Anderson, the head of DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, the R&D body of the U.S. Department of Defense. The organization is responsible for planning and overseeing the development of new weapons technology. The other VIP hostage, Kenneth Baker, was the president of Arms Tech, one of the largest and most powerful defense subcontractors in the country. An overseer of the US's war technology and a powerful arms producer don't just happen to meet in an out-of-the-way military outpost. No one reading this account can fail to realize that these two had no business in a nuclear weapons disposal plant. And since neither Anderson nor Baker was in the habit of enjoying winter picnics, Romanenko's assertion that there was a new weapon secretly being developed on the island rings all the more true. According to her, there was indeed such a weapon, and it was close enough to completion to warrant a field test. But what exactly was this new weapon? The mother of all weapons. Metal Gear. I'm not sure it's a term that many of you have heard. I know it only as a kind of journalistic urban legend while I was still a beat reporter. It was a phantom bipedal tank that moved with unprecedented speed across difficult terrain, such as mountains, deserts, and swamps, firing nuclear warheads from locations that were previously impossible. Once this weapon rolled off the assembly line, nuclear strikes could be made from almost any adverse terrain, and the tactical nuclear map for the whole world would be rewritten. This nuclear-capable bipedal tank is said to have lurked in the wings of both Outer Heaven of South Africa and Zanzibar land in Central Asia. One theory holds that the development had progressed to a working prototype stage, but the weapon never materialized on the world arms stage. In a strange coincidence or a casual connection, it was none other than Solid Snake who saved the world from the threat of Metal Gear during both incidents. But history does indeed repeat itself, and the specter of Metal Gear rose once again, in the state-of-the-art weapons development program on Shadow Moses Island. When I reached this point in the narrative, I suddenly checked myself. Wasn't Metal Gear's time effectively over? Ever since the collapse of the Soviet Union late last century, the idea of mutually assured destruction and the arms race to maintain this dangerous status quo had been fading into obsolescence. The START II treaty, signed by both superpowers, had already started to chip away at the nuclear stockpile even back then. In fact, the disposal facility at Shadow Moses had been built to disarm and temporarily store many of these same warheads. With the very idea of nuclear weapons under serious scrutiny, why would the military invest in the development of a nuclear-capable tank? Or was there something more to this weapon? The nature of the beast. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Metal Gear Rex, the newest of its kind. Almost 45 feet in height, equipped with Vulcan cannons and laser array, and shielded by a cutting-edge composite armor, rendering the unit practically impervious to even heat high-explosive anti-tank warheads, and I haven't even gotten to the truly scary part of this thing. The crown jewel of this Shadow Moses Metal Gear was its railgun technology. The gun was designed to fire nuclear warheads clear of the atmosphere, where they would automatically align themselves to the target and ride the optimal trajectory back down to Earth. And so what, you may think? There's a big fat missile flying in from the sky. Who cares where it came from? Just shoot the damn thing down. But here's the catch. You won't be able to find any of Rex's warheads, let alone shoot them down. Don't believe me? The facts bear me out. Normally, ballistic missiles go through 4 phases from launch to impact. The first is the boost phase, which consists of the time between the missile's launch and the point at which it leaves the atmosphere and exhausts its supply of rocket propellant. Following the burnout, the rocket enters the post-boost phase that concludes with the separation of the re-entry vehicle that contains the warhead. The third stage is the mid-course phase, in which the re-entry vehicle separates and achieves a controlled descent back into the atmosphere. The warhead's re-entry into the atmosphere and its arrival at the target mark the fourth and terminal phase. Current missile defense systems are alerted to incoming ballistic missiles by detecting the rocket burn during the missile's boost stage. However, Metal Gear's missile technology employs a railgun rather than conventional rocket propulsion to achieve boost stage acceleration. As a result, there is nothing for existing missile defense systems to detect. The railgun's effectiveness is nothing short of amazing, with a range of over 3,000 miles. Rivaling that of mid-range ballistic missiles, it reliably homes in within 170 feet of the target 50% of the time, placing it in the same class as the high-end ICBMs. The ability of a Metal Gear to conquer virtually all terrain means that the railgun can launch a stealthy nuclear strike from almost any spot on the globe. This invisible attack would make it impossible for anyone to pinpoint the origin of a given missile, even in the event of a strike. Without a clear aggressor to retaliate against, the concept of mutually assured destruction falls apart. Without the fear of MAD, the existing rules of nuclear non-engagement would no longer apply. It also wouldn't matter if the whole world knew that a nuclear missile would be launched from Shadow Moses Island. The missile defense system was helpless against the new breed of ballistic missiles. This was exactly what the terrorists counted on in unleashing Metal Gear Rex and its all-powerful nuclear weapon against the world. What I finally saw inside the fortress. Anyway, I trudged through the cave, sweating under the weight of my trusty tuna. Soon the rocks gave way to smooth walls and a row of bright lights. I had finally arrived. This was no doubt the cradle of insurrection, that military facility which Solid Snake so brilliantly penetrated, the eye of the storm that threatened to engulf the world. Fortunately, there was not a soul to be seen. I could, however, hear a faint cry amidst the whistle of the wind. "Gary, help me." I couldn't believe my ears. How could anyone on a remote island that I'd never visited know my name? I took a good, cautious look around and saw a familiar figure among the steel pillars in the corner. It was John D. My cousin, who'd so carelessly pitched me overboard into the sub-zero water only a few hours ago, was now sitting on the ground, tied to a post. What had happened? "Help, Gary." I trotted over to where he was calling pathetically, the tuna heavy on my back. He smiled weakly when he saw me. "What the hell happened to you, John D?" I asked, crouching down next to him. "I dunno. Right after I let you off, this black helicopter came around." "A helicopter?" "Yeah, a kind of squarish black one. The next thing I know, I'm tied up here." "Gary, why are you still wearing that fish?" Was there more to this as I'd suspected? Who was responsible? The military? Or that mysterious group mentioned in the disc? The one whose authority outstrips even that of the President of the United States? My thoughts were interrupted by a sudden gunfire. I instinctively pulled the tuna over me again. "Gary, you gotta help me. Untie me, will you?" Where was the shooter? The bullets were wildly ricocheting off the posts, making it impossible for me to pinpoint the origin. If I stayed put, I was dead meat. What should be my next course of action? "Untie me, man! Gary!" "Don't call me Gary, I'm just a tuna." I started to run, dodging bullets and sprinting up the stairs. I was unstoppable, speeding away like a gazelle in a large fish skin. "Farewell, Cousin John D. There are responsibilities greater than your safety that I must shoulder. Mine is a high and lonely path." Solid Snake versus the Army of Darkness. Now, let's take this moment to review Solid Snake's footsteps. The nuclear weapons disposal facility that he had infiltrated was crawling with terrorists, and engaging the enemy was unavoidable. This was a battlefield, no mistake about it. Snake's progress had been impeded at every step by the patrolling squads of super genome soldiers and such formidable foxhounds as Psycho Mantis, the master of psychokinesis and mind-reading, the chameleon-like decoy octopus, the chain gun-wielding giant Vulcan Raven, and the sniper wolf, one of the best marksmen in history. The following is a profile of individuals whose involvement with the government conspiracy seems to be the most intimate. The information should help make the terrifying truth about this case more clear. Revolver Ocelot, an ex-Spetsnaz, also known as Shalashashka. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, he found lucrative contracts as a mercenary in conflict-ridden regions throughout the world. His activities led to his recruitment by the U.S. government and his entry into Foxhound. As his code name indicates, he is a brilliant marksman whose preferred weapon is a revolver. Ocelot challenged Snake when he came looking for Kenneth Baker, the president of Armstech Inc., but the battle never reached the conclusion that Ocelot wanted due to the sudden intrusion of the stealth camouflage-clad cyborg ninja. The ninja's sword cut a deadly arc right through Ocelot's right arm, and Ocelot retreated in agony. The Russian sharpshooter also served as a liaison between his terrorist band and a Russian militia led by the renegade Colonel Gurlukovich. According to Foxhound leader Liquid Snake's master plan, the Russian militia would join them on Shadow Moses after the nuclear strike had been launched. They would then commence an all-out assault on the rest of the world from their safe retreat on the island, with nuclear missiles that could neither be detected nor defended against. Over 1,000 first-class Russian soldiers, next-generation genome commandos, and the combat skill and tactical cunning of Foxhound, this new army's objective was nothing short of World War III. The Ninja. The mystery figure equipped with a reinforced exoskeleton and stealth camouflage confounded Snake as well as the terrorists with his superhuman strength and agility. His interest seems not to have been what was happening within the facility. Evidence suggests that he was there solely to engage Snake in battle. It was through such an encounter that Snake realized the identity of the ninja. His name had been Gray Fox, and he was supposed to have been killed by Snake, his best friend. This may seem surprising, but the dead coming back to life is a fairly routine occurrence. There are examples throughout the world to prove the fact. When a Roland Grace's grave was relocated in 1952, there were deep gouge marks discovered on the inside of the Hungarian farmer's casket lid. It looked as though the dying man had tried to claw his way out of the coffin. On a brighter note, a Japanese man called Jin Imon Natakama walked out of a stalactite cave in 1914, a full 10 years after he had gone missing while exploring the same cave. His family was doubly astonished to discover that he had apparently not aged a day since they last saw him. All this makes complete sense to me, and it should to you as well in a moment. 2 words. Pyramid power. I have no doubt that Gray Fox was forced to undergo the same revival process by military scientists in the course of their genetic experiments. Horrific genetic experiments. Liquid Snake. I know exactly what you are thinking as you hear the name of the man who led the Shadow Moses uprising. And my answer is yes. Solid Snake, our hero, and Liquid Snake are none other than twin brothers. They are not, however, twins in the usual sense. This is yet another manifestation of the U.S. military's dangerous love affair with genetic engineering. The 2 snakes are fighting machines created through the so-called Project Les Enfants Terribles. The rumors that the government is attempting mass production of super soldiers are numerous and persistent. Just the other day, I came across something called D-People EO, a humanoid combat droid. Development on the outer shell had gone off without a hitch, but the unit had to have a human being inside to function, which decreased its utility somewhat. The military finally realized the fact late in the game and pulled the plug. There was also a plan to use a well-known psychokinetic DNA material to breed an army of gifted soldiers. Unfortunately, someone pointed out that there is indeed no spoon, at least not in a normal combat situation. Solid and Liquid Snakes, however, were successfully created from their father, Big Boss's genetic material. They were literally born to be extraordinary soldiers, and it was no surprise that when they finally met, the result would be a titanic confrontation. What I saw on the roof. I hauled myself and the tuna up the steps, dodging the invisible sniper. The spiral staircase seemed to go on forever. Just as I was about to give up, I saw the exit to the roof. I pulled open the door and lurched into the faintly lit gloom. The sub-zero wind felt soothing on my overworked body. I laid the tuna down and sat down next to it, trying to catch my breath. The enemy may pursue me even here, but I had nothing left in me to run with. I pulled out my hip flask of peanut butter and bourbon and took a long swig. The fiery liquid slid down my throat, hot and thick. Peanut butter is my Waterloo. When I was a kid, I was a wuss who couldn't eat peanut butter like other red-blooded children. One day, I decided to confront this weakness of mine and put myself on a peanut butter overload. Anything I put in my mouth had to have peanut butter on it. I piled the stuff on everything from chili dogs without onions, my favorite dish, to spearmint gum to my first girlfriend's lips. The inevitable result was that I came to hate peanut butter. If I didn't much like it before, I now loathed it with abandon. If I could gather the entire world's supply of peanut butter and dump it into the Bermuda Triangle, I would. As it is, all I can do is eat as much of the stuff as I can. Peanut butter, I will always hate you. How does that song go? And I will always hate you. No, that's not it. Will always. It must be another song I'm thinking of. Can't remember. Snow is starting to coat my shoes. Where was my tuna? Oh, there it is, right next to me. Bright light in my eye, now I remember what day it is. June 24th, the anniversary of my UFO abduction. Why am I so sleepy? And what is that sound? It was a chopper. A squarish black one. And it was coming closer. Foxdie, the secret assassination virus. If you recall, I wrote that the two hostages, the DARPA chief Donald Anderson and Arms Tech president Kenneth Baker, died of a heart attack while they were being rescued by Solid Snake. The actual cause of their death, however, was a specially engineered assassination virus called Foxdie. Foxdie is a retrovirus that kills only a select people. Its development was passed on to Naomi Hunter from her predecessor. Once Foxdie finds its way into its target system, the person dies almost immediately. It's practically a viral equivalent of spontaneous human combustion. Dr. Hunter had injected Solid Snake with this virus, and as he unwittingly made contact with his targets one by one, they fell prey to the retrovirus's power. But the decision to infect Snake was not hers. That order, in fact, came directly from the Pentagon. The Defense Department's goal. The true objective of the DoD was to selectively assassinate the perpetrators of the terrorist uprising. All Snake had to do was come into contact with the targets. The mission objectives he was actually given, namely to stop the nuclear launch and rescue the hostages, were nothing more than a smokescreen. By simply sending Snake in as a disease vector, the Pentagon stood to reclaim their expensive investments, Metal Gear and the bodies of the genome soldiers, with little risk of damage. The Pentagon also believed that Foxdie would successfully cover up the incident by the virtue of its lethality. However, Naomi Hunter's re-engineering of the virus cast grave doubts on the reliability of Foxdie itself. Even though the nature of her manipulation was unknown, the Pentagon decided to take extreme measures to counteract this development. The bomber on the horizon. Whew. Alarmed by the news of Dr. Hunter's tampering, the then Defense Secretary, Jim Hausman, personally took over as the mission's commander and headed for Shadow Moses on an AWACS. Around the same time, a bomber took off from a base in Galena, Alaska, carrying a payload of surface-piercing B-6113 tactical missiles. The Defense Secretary had decided on a more direct approach to cover up, fighting nuke with nuke. It was a rationale that smacked of a return to the arms race, and Snake was furious. He had already succeeded in destroying Metal Gear Rex, and the terrorist incident was over for all intents and purposes. Was the nuclear strike to be his prize for accomplishing all of this? As it turned out, the airstrike never happened. Somebody had countermanded Jim Hausman's orders. You may think that the only person with the authority to override the orders of the Secretary of Defense was his Commander-in-Chief, the President of the United States. But like most things in this account, the truth is far from obvious. The hand that stopped the nuclear strike was that of a shadowy secret society. But what kind of a group is it whose power outstrips even that of the American presidency? The face of the enemy. When I came to, I was sitting in a weather station cabin with a burlap sack on my head and my hands tied behind my back. So this is the way it ends, I thought dimly. I haul myself all the way out to this pimple on the Arctic and die at the hands of an invisible executioner, without finding out a thing. One of my captors moved in closer and started to rummage through my inside chest pocket. I cursed inwardly. This was where I carried Nastasha Romanenko's disc, the entire account of the Shadow Moses incident. My policy is the best way to ensure that something doesn't get stolen is to have it with you at all times. Clearly, I needed to reevaluate that one. The man easily found and seized the disc. "What is this?" he demanded. "Whatever it is, it's worth more than you." I responded with as much menace and dignity as the burlap on my head allowed. Well, that is something. What followed was both highly tedious and painful, and nothing of great significance was said until that electrifying statement. "We have the disc back." We've now come full circle since the start of my account and caught up to the point where it originated. It was unclear how the disc had gotten to Max Smithson at Mega Surprise, but my captor's words indicated that the disc had originally belonged to them. Either that or they were the ones who wanted it the most urgently. I took my courage in my hands and opened a dialogue with them. "Yo, you guys happen to be that secret society whose president outstrips even that of the president of the American presidency? Answer me, you artificial coloring on a cheap drugstore candy cane." This had the exact effect I'd hoped for, namely, to send them into a violent fit of rage. I must have hit pretty close to home. The contents of the disc were as good as verified. This was indeed the secret society whose power outstripped even that of the American presidency. In my delight, I hardly paid attention to the obscenities that were being screamed at me, nor to the distinct sound of a gun being pulled out of its holster. It was then that the cabin suddenly erupted into controlled chaos. It seemed only seconds from the time the window was smashed in to the moment I realized that my captors had been decimated and I was alone with my savior. Who was this human whirlwind? I was ready to lose my lunch from the curiosity and the terror. I could taste the peanut butter in my mouth. I could hear the enigma walk up to me and lift the burlap sack off my head. I concentrated on the hammering of my heart for a moment, then slowly looked up. There was nobody there. I could see nothing, sense nothing, but someone was untying the ropes biting into my wrists. Invisible hands placed themselves on either side of my head in a strange parody of a coronation. They deftly removed the bandana I had earlier fashioned into a clumsy bandage for my bruised head. The faded piece of cloth was not my own, but a flotsam found on the beach. I reached for the unseen figure with my shaking hands, but with one quick flick of the bandana, it was gone. But there was more surprises to come. As I gingerly moved my stiff body, I felt an unfamiliar bulk against my chest, and discovered the precious optical disc, miraculously recovered. Not only that, but there were enough backup copies to fill me with awe and pop the stitches on my flimsy pocket. I thought of the mysterious savior, possessed of superhuman fighting ability, invisible and capable of burning discs in an instant. There was only one possible explanation. He had to be an alien, probably the little gray kind. Life after Shadow Moses. And so I came in from the cold to my hole of an apartment in New York, my trusty tuna beside me. The landlord mentioned that my neighbor, the starving student, had gone missing recently. It could be that I was nosing around the wrong information from his machine. If I ever see him alive again, I should apologize. I am currently banging out this manuscript on an antique typewriter. This is the truth as described on the optical disc, and as elaborated and verified by my own experiences on that fearsome island. As this account draws to a close, my thoughts dwell more and more on Nastasha Romanenko, the woman who risked everything by recording the facts of the incident onto this disc. I think it was her way of giving voice to the victims of this mission, the casualties of nuclear weapons throughout modern history, and to all the lives disrupted and damaged by an elaborate government conspiracy. Her will was passed on to a counterculture journalist in New York City, that's me, and the truth is now out there for all to see, just as she dreamed. Readers, the responsibility to disseminate the facts of the Shadow Moses incident is now yours. What will you risk to know the truth? Publishers afterward. This nonfiction work was based on the factual account written by Nastasha Romanenko, a military analyst who allegedly took part in a secret mission to counter a terrorist incident on Alaska's Shadow Moses Island. Her account was published in its original, unabridged form as In the Darkness of Shadow Moses, after the successful publication of this volume. Gary McGolden, the author, is a journalist and nonfiction writer who is best known for his past bestseller, The Telekinetic Powers of the Loch Ness Monster, the true energy source of UFOs. The details of McGolden's adventures on Shadow Moses remain uncorroborated, but there are serious doubts as to his tuna-aided landing on the island. There is, in fact, ample evidence that he was swept out to another small island several miles south of Shadow Moses and failed to realize that fact. McGolden has seemingly vanished into thin air following his manuscript's arrival at our humble offices. While this has been a source of great pleasure to our accounting department, I sincerely hope that this notoriously fickle but talented writer is hard at work on a follow-up to this volume. Though certain aspects of the book require further fact-checking, this alone should not dissuade you of the veracity of many of its main assertions, nor should you dismiss the contents of Nastasha Romanenko's disc outright. Instead, readers should approach this account with an open mind and a sense of adventure, much as Gary McGolden did when he first received the disc in the mail. I should note, however, that Gary was mistaken about one thing. I never mailed him that disc. Max Smithson, Editor-in-Chief, Mega Surprise Magazine. Oh no. That's 324 pages. Oh my. We'll do it live. Screw it. I dedicate this book to the casualties of Shadow Moses as well as to all those who suffered the tyranny of the nuclear weapons. And to Richard Ames. Nastasha Romanenko. Prologue. Shadow Moses Island. Redacted coordinates. Even the local fishermen rarely venture to this outcropping of land, yet the incident of all incidents took place on this remote isle north of Alaska's Fox Islands. A number of confirmed facts undermine the U.S. government's denial of the entire affair. Among those are the sudden appearance of the Ohio-class nuclear submarine USS Discovery off Shadow Moses, far away from its designated position, and an official record that shows that a squadron of 6 fully armed F-117 Nighthawks departed from Galena Air Force Base for Alaska a scant 16 hours later. In another possibly related event, an E-3C AWACS on emergency deployment to the Alaska area is said to have had none other than the then National Security Advisor Jim Hausman as its onboard VIP. What exactly happened on Shadow Moses? There was no lack of rumors to account for this series of unusual military activities. An armed incursion, a coup attempt by a branch of the military, and other theories made its way to the public table. I can state unequivocally that none of them came close to the truth. What actually took place was the single greatest terrorist incident in modern history. It was an act of political violence on a scale the world had never seen. A blow that threatened to send the Damocles' sword of nuclear warfare into a freefall. Most significant of all, the attack stemmed from several so-called black projects which the U.S. government had been conducting in top secret away from public scrutiny. I have in my hand 2 optical discs. One contains the entire record of events that took place on Shadow Moses Island that fateful day, the takeover of a nuclear weapons disposal plant by an armed group. Other key points of this incredible record are the identification of the perpetrators as the government's own genetically enhanced next-generation commandos and a covert Special Forces squad, Foxhound, with a long, dark history of secret intervention. The existence of one Metal Gear Rex, a bipedal nuclear-capable tank whose development was one of the most classified projects of all time. The discovery of a massive government conspiracy, the activities of a former Foxhound operative who single-handedly took on this daunting situation and averted the crisis, a man who is known only by his codename, Solid Snake. The other remaining disc holds the details of Project Foxdie, a massive cover-up which the U.S. government planned and executed in order to prevent exposure. There are, after all, forces within the U.S. government who seek to maintain the military power structure established in the last century, and will not hesitate to resuscitate the terror of nuclear arms in order to achieve that end. My intent is to expose their activity and the entirety of the Shadow Moses affair through this book. Only then can we hope to free the coming generations from the damnosa hereditas of the 20th century nuclear arms race. I looked up from the mass of documents at the sound of the doorbell. On the monitor in front of me was a half-finished status report on the resurgence of nuclear arms development in a certain Middle Eastern state. The UNSCOM, United Nations Special Commission, had officially requested a survey by the UN weapons inspectors and had been refused entry. Tensions were once again running high in the Gulf. As a military analyst whose specialty was nuclear arms, I was under contract from a think tank to produce a study of the situation. It was due the day after the next, and interruptions were definitely not welcome. I ground out my cigarette in the ashtray and stepped out of the study. All visitors to my house are checked via a surveillance camera and then let in through the heavy gate. The property itself is surrounded by a high wall. It may seem like overkill for a beach community, but security is a necessity in greater Los Angeles, if only to keep out the legion of swimsuit-clad tourists. However, there was nobody to be seen at the gate. It was either a prank or the camera was malfunctioning. Reluctant to investigate but feeling unsettled nevertheless, I headed back to the study and sat back down at the computer to continue my work. Just then, someone spoke behind me. "You always were a little careless." I spun around, kicking my chair over. There was a man standing at the entrance of the study, slouching in a well-tailored suit. "Richard." He caught my eye and grinned. Ignoring my surprise, he strolled into the room, gazing around at the pile of books and papers. "And still as disorganized as ever?" He shrugged his shoulders in a familiar gesture, triggering a wave of memories laced with bitterness. "Richard Ames and I were married, once upon a time. We were both young and working for the DIA. We spent much of our brief marriage in disagreement over virtually every issue, and just as I came to realize that our union was a mistake, he disappeared from my life. A while later, I received the paperwork for a divorce from his lawyer. There was a generous alimony offer involved, which I refused. Not only did I find the thought of owing him anything intolerable, I also wanted to prove that he was not the only one who could walk away without an explanation. The divorce was finalized without us ever meeting face to face, and we were legally strangers once again. In the 5 years since, I quit the DIA and became a freelance analyst. I had not seen Richard at all, nor even heard of his whereabouts. "How did you get in here?" I demanded. After all, attempting to scale the wall or force the front door would immediately trigger the security system. But he refused to be ruffled. "If you're going to use a flimsy lock like that, may as well not bother. I'd recommend a more professional security setup. Does the term breaking and entering mean nothing to you, Richard? You know, law isn't my field of expertise, he replied nimbly, and peered over my shoulder at the report on the computer display. Radioisotope projectile separator, uranium-235 production feasibility for high-speed gas centrifuge. This must be about that Middle East nuke development. Looks like your career is going well. That's great. I pushed Richard aside and asked him flatly, "What do you want?" He took a step back and regarded me with a slightly mischievous smile. "What, you afraid I came back to give us another chance?" He let the silence linger as if to relish my reaction. Then suddenly, formal, he continued, "It's an official request from the DIA. He placed a folder on the desk. "I'm asking for your cooperation as a member of NEST. NEST stands for Nuclear Emergency Search Team, a group that operates on Department of Energy budget. It was established in 1974 to provide technological support to the FBI in areas of intelligence, investigation, site securement, damage containment, and medical response during incidents involving criminal threats of nuclear weapon use. Call it a band of experts of nuclear terrorism. On nuclear terrorism, if you will. NEST consists of independently contracted scientists from federally funded research entities like Los Alamos and Lawrence Livermore, and military specialists from groups dealing with nuclear arms issues. I happen to be one of the latter group." Richard was opening the file folder. "You've heard of Shadow Moses Island, I assume?" I nodded assent. I had indeed heard of the remote place north of Alaska's Fox Islands. Though it was hardly public knowledge, the island was home to a nuclear weapons disposal facility. According to the terms of the START II, Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, the total number of tactical nuclear warheads owned by the U.S. and Russia were reduced to somewhere between 3,000 and 3,500 in the later decades of the 20th century. The outcome was a massive number of warheads in need of disposal when there was already a shortage of storage space for radioactive materials. As a result, warheads had to be kept somewhere before they could be dismantled and their radioactive elements extracted for long-term storage. The Shadow Moses facility was the answer. It was the crystallization of the forces of nuclear proliferation, political engineering, that gives preference to delaying a solution rather than producing one, and a hidden military agenda to preserve what it could of the old nuclear stockpile. Richard took out several photographs from the folder and handed them to me. They all appeared to be satellite captures of the nuclear weapons disposal plant on Shadow Moses Island, perhaps acquired from the NRO, National Reconnaissance Office. There were multiple human figures around the building structures. Richard broke the silence. "The disposal plant was seized by terrorists." I looked up sharply at the news, but his next words left me speechless. "And the ringleaders are Foxhound members. An irregular team of the best commandos the military has to offer, armed with cutting-edge technology. That was Foxhound. The best of the best, and completely unknown to the public they ostensibly serve. Their function was to intervene in the kind of low-intensity conflicts the U.S. could not officially touch. They were the shadow soldiers of numerous regional conflicts and civil wars, shaping history with sabotage, selective assassination, and other covert acts of war." Richard had more to say. "It's not just Foxhound that's involved in this. Foxhound was conducting joint exercises with the Next Generation Special Forces, and they're a part of the takeover as well. The Next Generation Special Forces is an aggressive anti-terrorism squad deployed to counter acts of political violence involving weapons of mass destruction, such as nuclear, biological, and chemical warfare methods. The combat philosophy is derived from the one used for Force 21, and most of the recruits come from a mercenary background. The men are intensively trained in VR environment, and their combat capability is estimated to be well beyond even those of Delta Force or the Night Stalkers. While the government categorically denies the accusation, there are persistent rumors that the men have been genetically enhanced to increase tactical advantage. Foxhound and the next generation special forces, they were without a doubt the most skilled group of fighting men produced by the U.S., and they had hijacked a nuclear arsenal. Richard had more bad news. There are also civilian hostages involved. Two of them happen to be the DARPA chief, Donald Anderson, and Kenneth Baker, the president of ArmsTech. The Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency is the research satellite of the U.S. Defense Department, charged with planning and leading the development of new weapons technology. AT happens to be one of the top 3 defense contractors in the country. There is no such thing as a coincidence, especially the kind that involves the head of these two organizations meeting in an out-of-the-way nuclear weapons disposal plant. I decided to be direct with Richard. There was something going on in that disposal facility, I take it. Let me guess, a demonstration of a new weapon. How should I know? Shadow Moses is also a prime Northern Lights observation locale, you know. Whatever Richard knew, he wasn't telling. But his evasiveness only confirmed my suspicions. Whatever was going on, this was no ordinary terrorist incident. With that in mind, I moved on to another point. What are their demands? They want a body. Not just any corpse, though. They want Foxhound's founder, Big Boss, legendary soldier, best fighting man of the 20th century, the whole works. His body. Why would they want something like that so badly? No idea, but unless they have it within 24 hours, they'll launch a nuclear strike. Richard glanced at the watch coolly. So we have about 19 hours. You don't seem too worried. The DoD is already working on the situation. Just as I'd expected, Richard always has a plan in place and the machinery in motion before opening up to someone else. All he asks from others is approval after the fact. Shadow Moses is completely locked down. We had to rule out deploying an entire assault team. Instead, we're inserting a single operative to free the hostages and prevent the nuclear strike. Impossible. Possible. For Solid Snake. Solid Snake? The former Foxhound? A legend among mercenaries for single-handedly bringing down the fortress cities of Outer Heaven and Zanzibar land. Yes. With Solid Snake in the picture, there was a possibility of success, but still. USS Discovery, an Ohio-class nuclear submarine, is already in place with Snake on board. So the plan was already a go. I looked Richard in the eye and held his gaze. And what do I have to do with all this? He grinned. Snake may be a legend, but he knows jack about nuclear weapons, which is why I'm asking you to be a part of mission support. We'll have you set up in no time. Right on cue, 2 men started to move a large piece of hardware, apparently communication equipment, into the study. Richard nodded towards the bulky load. I'd like you to be available to Snake for consultation via satellite link-up. Okay. 36 pages in, and that is going to be enough for me. Maybe I'll go back and handle the rest of this, but that is going to be it for the briefing. We all know the story of Metal Gear Solid 1. If not, please check out the previous playlist on the channel. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. When we come back, we are going to start a new game. Until then, keep telling stories.